Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, of course, the Philanthropy Mastermind series. And so happy that you could come and hang out. Whether or not you attended the conference, AFP ICON in Toronto, we really do want you to participate in this conversation today. I know that we have several people in the audience who were kind enough to join us, and they may have something to offer, but I don't want to force them to do that. So what I'm going to do is ask that if you are in the audience, and I know specifically that we have Jen Newmeyer, Diana Hoyt, and Ria Wong all here. So if any of you or anyone else who is at the conference wants to participate in this discussion, I can give you the ability to talk, I understand, and I may be able to even put you on the stage. This will be a first for us using Zoom webinar in this format. So I hope you'll bear with us as we do that. But just send me a note if you would within the chat if you wish to participate in that way, and you can do that as a note to me directly, and that way I'll know. And in fact, I already have one from Ria, so I'll go ahead and do that. Thank you, Ria. And Jen, I see that you're here too, and happy to chat. Thank you so much. And if there's anybody else who is interested in that, please do and let us know. And for those who are just here to learn what happened up there, you'll be doing plenty of that and hearing about it from the right people who really were paying attention throughout the course of several days, not just focusing on the eclipse, but actually on the content. So we're going to have lots of stuff there for you to learn from and to ask about. So please do use the chat and the Q&A as your places to engage in the conversation, even if you don't want to directly contribute to an assessment of or kind of a highlights reel of the conference. I do want to say one thing before we begin, which is that this platform for the Philanthropy Mastermind series is provided generously by the folks at DonorSearch, who were kind enough to let me go up there and interview, in fact, 7 of the 8 awardees or honorees that AFP had come to the stage. And that's part of everything we do here. We've been doing since 2016. So if you want to learn more about this series, besides what's happening today, just check out DonorSearch at donorsearch.net. You can learn a lot about your donors there. You can also check out the entirety of the Philanthropy Mastermind series under the Resources tab. Now, with that, I do want to welcome a couple people on the stage as I find a way to let others in to join them. And of course, that is our friends Nick and Lori. Nick, Lori, if you want to make yourselves visible. There you are, Nick and Lori. So we had, the reason why it said "and friends" is because I wasn't sure how many people would be willing to give their quick assessment and top 10 takeaways. And these two brave people were the first to raise their hands in this. So I wanted to welcome them. And if you don't mind, actually, Nick, Lori, would you please just introduce yourselves? Lori, would you like to start?
Happy to. Thank you, Jay. So my name is Lori Worley, and I served as president of the AFP chapter a couple of years ago. And I know some of the folks on the call I've met before, so thanks. I'm glad you're there. And yeah, and so I, just to give you context from my perspective, I am in the marketing field, and I live right at that intersection of marketing and fundraising. I have been a fundraiser. Thank you, Patty. The AFP DC chapter. Sorry, I am here in DC, so I didn't make that clear. Anyway, that intersection of marketing and fundraising is kind of my sweet spot. And Nick, how about you?
Yeah, so my name is Nick Solog. I am a fundraising consultant. I own my own firm. I'm based in Richmond, Virginia, and am a member of the AFP Central Virginia chapter. And I happen to also be chairing VFRI, which is the Virginia Fundraising Institute, which is a conference co-hosted by all 6 AFP chapters in Virginia. And this was my first time going to the AFP ICON conference.
Thank you for that. That's a good note. And it looks like we're not exactly geographically distributed here. So one person I'm going to promote to a panelist, cross your fingers, is my friend Ria Wong, who hopefully will be able to join us as a panelist any second, technology permitting, who is coming to us, I believe, from New York. So Ria, if you can see that, and there you are.
Hi, everyone. I didn't realize I would be on camera today. Came from the gym, but here it is. Yes, coming to you from New York. Hi, Jake.
Hi there. Sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you. And I won't do this to anybody else unless they say they're willing, but one note, please be dressed. And obviously everybody is here looking wonderful. But Ria, so where are you today? Are you back in
I am back in Brooklyn, so not in DC, but just a little bit up the coast. And it was also, Nick, my first time at AFP, so I'm happy to talk about my impressions and thoughts and takeaways.
And Ria, would you mind telling people, even though it's on the screen, they may not be able to see it, about where you are, what you do?
Oh, yes. Thank you. So I am a consultant, and I spent my first 12 and a half years as an executive director in the field. And so I've dedicated my career to teaching people all the things I didn't know about fundraising, specifically with major gifts. And I'm also a podcaster. So I've had Jay on my podcast, which has been a lot of fun.
My favorite podcaster in this space, I have to say. I also want to go ahead and promote the panelist, Jen Newmeyer, who's another Mid-Atlantic person. This is not the intention to only have Mid-Atlantic people here. We did send out notes to others, and that's why I said I'm not sure who's in the audience. I'm trying to do that on the fly. But if you have something you want to contribute, please let me know. But there is Jen. Jen, hi, how are you?
Hello. Good to see you again, Jay. Good to see you, Lori, and the rest of the panelists. Thanks for having me.
And Jen, for people who don't know you, can you give a brief introduction?
Yeah, sure. I am with PBS. I'm the Senior Director of Digital Fundraising. I am on the board of AFP DC, served with Lori, and I lead the Education Committee. And I am an author. I also have a podcast. I do a lot of things for the nonprofit sector outside of my day job under the name Charity Jen. So you can find me on the socials at Charity Jen.
And this was not a first-time occurrence for you with AFP, I'm sure.
That's right. This is my second ICON. I was at the ICON in New Orleans last year.
Excellent. And we may have somebody join us later who I think has been doing this for over 10 or 15 years. So we'll see what the difference is in perceptions about this conference. But thank you all for being willing to do this and to share with those who couldn't go. And now that we're more increasingly Brady Bunchified, I'm not sure where to start, but maybe we can start, since Nick, I think you were the first on camera, to just, can you give us kind of a short, window on your overall impressions of the conference and maybe your top highlight?
My overall was that it was both exhilarating and exhausting. I'm an extreme extrovert. I love to be around people, but it was a lot. And I left feeling great, and I learned a lot and met a lot of people. But it was also exhausting. I'm glad I went, and I hope to go to more. My biggest, I think it would be meeting some folks that I have been sort of inspired by over the years in person. I mean, there were too many educational sessions to name like which one was my favorite, but getting to meet some people that I have followed for years, some like since I started in my career, and actually meeting them in person. That was probably the highlight for me.
And Lori, how about yourself?
So definitely a highlight for me is the networking. As Nick said, there were lots of folks there. I think that AFP Global was really pleased with the turnout. Not to be overly US centric, but it was in technically another country. It's not the US, and so I think that given that it was in Toronto, I think, and that can maybe, there was some concern that it might dampen some of the turnout. I think they were really happy with the numbers, is what I heard. So lots of great networking. I had the fun of hearing people speak who I know, especially through AFP, but I've never heard them speak before. I've served with them on a board or done this or that and, know them, but not as a speaker. So that was a lot of fun for me.
And let me see, before I go on, I did note, Nick, that you were saying that Mazarine is here, and I don't see her among the attendees. So maybe I'm just looking too quickly here. Oh, there you are. It's under MT, isn't it? All right. Well, that was a little tricky of you, Mazarine, but I want you to be able to join this stage. So if you'd confirm you'd like to be here, just let me know, and I will definitely let you up onto the stage. And the answer is yes. So I'm going to do that. But while I'm doing that, I'm also going to ask Ria if you'd give us a few impressions. This is, again, your first conference, but you are really heavily steeped in the sector. So what were your impressions, and did you have a chief highlight?
Yeah, so double click on what everyone has said. It was so fun. And it was fun to see you in person, Jay. I didn't realize you were so tall. So that was a treat. The other thing I'll just flag that I thought was really, I really applaud AFP for was really leaning into, I mean, I wasn't part of the controversy of what happened at AFP Toronto, but I thought the leadership did a really good job of being transparent about, you know, anti-Black racism at the AFP level. And also, I got a chance to have an early morning meeting with the folks who are behind fundraising AI. And I think AI is certainly, generative AI is on everyone's mind. How do we leverage it for good? How do we use it to be more efficient in our jobs? And I think as a sector, we have to be forward thinking, because if we're not involved with this AI, it's going to get out ahead of us, and we need to be part of the creating some ethical guardrails, not to be caught on the back foot.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Jen, I want to hear from you next, but I want to make sure we have a chance to say hello to our newest panelist there. I'm sorry, not reading the code, MT. I was being a little slow today. Say hello and introduce yourself, please.
Oh, is that for Jen or for myself?
No, for you. Yes.
Oh, okay. Hello. My name is Mazarine Trace, also MT. I think that was like my 4th or 5th icon I've gone to. I'm not a member.
Uh-oh. You know this is being recorded. Somebody's going to let Mike Geiger know. You're going
Well,
to be.
I went really to be
Fergie
part
or
of the co-conspirator cohort. That was the
Yes.
goal for me. I was on the panel about what happened at AFP GTC around anti-Black racism, and my takeaway. Maybe this isn't time for that, but I'm just going to say it. AFP doesn't care about anti-Black racism, but they do care about optics. I will say that.
All right. Well, I'm not going to stop you, but I think that needs more time. And so I want to make sure Jen has it. So no, wait, hold the thought, because you can't get away with just saying now. We need to talk about it more. But I want to make sure Jen has a chance to speak also. So Jen, what about you?
Yeah, well, I think I agree with a lot of what the other panelists have said. Like, yes, it's as Nick had said, like, yes, it's exhausting. I think if you've never been before, just know that going in, like, it is very tiring. You're talking to a lot of people. It's socially can be very draining, but again, so worth it. I agree with Lori. I saw some of my own fellow board members speak, and it was just so wonderful to see them present in such an authoritative way on their topics. So that was really great. I agree with Rhea that one of the highlights for me was the panel on on what happened with Toronto and MT. Like, I'm so glad that you're here to kind of share some insight on that, because it really was very, sort of peeking behind the curtain of what happened, and just seeing the community support of the co-conspirators was really, I was so happy that there was that support for the 3 Black board members who had such a difficulty on the board. So I was very that was definitely one of the highlights. I will say there were 2 other highlights that I had. One was a session on Monday with Jack Alato and Angela Barnes on the problems with donor-centric fundraising. And, this is not often in my world because, I'm not often dealing with major donor. Well, I don't deal with major donors. I'm in digital fundraising, but it's really great to kind of get that insight and understand what's happening within philanthropy from that lens, and just sort of talking about, the hero or the savior complex with donors when you're, coming at things from such a donor-centric standpoint, and, really touching on the issues within the universities and the presidents who had to resign and go before Congress. And so it was just a really great conversation, and one that, was, a takeaway for me, and that I'll remember as a highlight. There was also one other highlight, like in the exhibit hall, there were a couple of what they called learning labs, and you could kind of wander around and, see, some of the presenters. And Alice Ferris was sharing a tip on Chat GPT that she uses when she travels. And, because she doesn't have much time, there's not a lot of time to kind of like look for, areas that she wants to visit, or restaurants she wants to go to, or highlights of the town or the city that she's visiting. So she goes to ChatGPT, puts in her dates of when she's traveling. She puts in the times that she has available, how much time she has available, and sort of a little, color of like what she would like to see within the area. And ChatGPT kind of helps her build this really cool itinerary. So I'm definitely going to use that. I have to go to Las Vegas in May, and so that was just a really cool little tip, and I enjoyed learning about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And also, it shows the two ends, I guess, of a conference like this, that they can go from when they are brave enough to do it, from big, broad issues, things that affect many, if not all of us, depends upon your point of view, I guess, but I would say all of us, to things that are really very tactical and almost tactile. And AI definitely falls into that. I know, Ria, you have to go very soon. So I would typically say, what's your recommendation for people at the end of a conversation like this? But I'll go ahead and take the liberty of asking you that now, since that was your first time around for this. But again, you're dealing with this stuff every day and talking to so many people in the sector every single week. So now that you've come away from Toronto, are there any kind of things that you might recommend for people who would attend in the future, as you just did, especially first timers, but also maybe any notes for AFP itself?
Yeah. So wear comfortable shoes. That's going to be my first tip. Make sure you have chapstick and that you hydrate. Those are some quick tips that I learned. I think that for me, I came away with more questions than answers. And I think it was actually such a wonderful opportunity to connect with people in person. Um, so I definitely think I'll be attending again. I mean, for me, and I know folks who are content creators, I actually brought my podcasting equipment. So I was able to grab a couple of interviews with folks in person, which was such a treat. Um, you know, I think my biggest takeaway is, to be totally transparent, I didn't actually make it to very many sessions. I spent the time hanging out with people in the exhibit hall, in the hallways. And I think it was those little connections that really made the difference for me. And so I guess if folks are listening and have not been an AFP or are thinking about the future AFPs, is leave yourself enough time for serendipity. Like, I actually ended up having some really wonderful conversations with folks that I've never met before. It ended up being fantastic. I now have a bunch of podcast guests lined up through this experience. And I think, especially in this post-pandemic world, I think we're all so hungry to connect with people in an authentic, real way. So that was really great. I was tired at the end for sure, but my cup was filled. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Ria. And as you rotate off, thank you for dropping in. And again, Nonprofit Lowdown, I hope you'll check that out, especially if you recorded some things for the podcast there. I'm sure those will be great to hear when they're released. Thank you. And you were earlier talking about the same kinds of things, not in the same way, but as Mazarine was. And so something that you didn't hear, MT, before we began, unless you were listening, but you weren't part of the panel yet. is something that Nick had said from the start. I think that was after we went on camera, about the initial session. So I'm bringing this up because I think there are a couple ways of looking at a session like that, a keynote. And one is, what are we discussing? And then how are we discussing it? And part of it was, I mean, first of all, I brought the book, which I think a lot of people did too, in this vain hope that I would get it signed. And then I ended up being somewhere and I couldn't go. But I could have gone had I known that it was at 3 o'clock instead of 1:30. So part of the dilemma with something like this is making all the things work. So my hat's off to all the people who worked on the conference, because it's hard. But I imagine that one of the things that was difficult is figuring out, how do we have a conversation in a meaningful way so that we can have a Pulitzer Prize winner who has meaningfully affected the conversation in the United States, and I hope Canada too, but also make sure it's through the lens of people in our field, and especially people from Canada, since they were the kind hosts of this conference. So if you don't mind, maybe Nick, do you have any thoughts on that beyond the kind of the practical, why this thing started at 3, about the discussion? And I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this, if you sat in on that discussion, and just in general, about whether or not AFP is digging into these issues in the way that it needs to, and if not, what it needs to do next time around.
Yeah, so my comment was more, it was before we came on camera, was talking about my frustration, and I'm assuming others may have as well, but the actual keynote did not start until 3, but that session was slated to end at 3. So I came in late because, like Ria, I had been engaging in conversations with people I haven't seen in forever, or we're just meeting in the exhibit hall, and got in there and I was like, oh man, I missed the keynote and I wanted to be there for it. But I stayed in there, and thankfully I didn't. But I'm not sure how a schedule can get so off track that it did not start until the time it was supposed to end. And I'm glad they gave them the full time that they had been allotted to do their session. I personally am a fan of keynotes that are not interviews. So I think the conversation was extremely important. And so I don't know the type of format that would be most appropriate for that. And maybe I'm completely off base and I'm okay with that. And I'm glad we had the conversation, but that's really where I was talking about. Like, I tend to think of keynotes as, and this is probably because of my background and experience and what I've been exposed to, is that they are more individual driven, or if it is 2 or more individuals, they are presenting together, not in an interview format.
Let me open this up. What do you all think about this, about the subject matter as a whole, how it was addressed in that session and more broadly, especially since Nazarene, you were a big part of that. Other panels.
I asked Nika about it afterwards because she was one of the interviewers. She's the interviewer. So for folks who weren't there, Nika Allen interviewed Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project, which talked about, it's a brick of a book. But there's also a documentary about it, and there's, I'm sure, synopsis is online if you want to check it out. But Nika was also, I mean, all of us were like, when are they going to let her start? And so it was a really big gaffe on AFP's part. I don't know who was in charge of that, but we were like, that sucked. And then we were like, okay, now this is giving me life. After she came on, but 1619 was the date the first ship of slaves first came to America. And what a lot of people don't understand or know about Canada is that they did have slavery. And a lot of people are not taught that in Canadian schools. And so Nika really wanted to show folks there that that was the case, which I think is why they did the interview format, Nick. I was like blown away by it. I was like, I should be taking notes on this. This is so powerful. I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but I was like, wow. Anybody who didn't come to that, AADO, African American Development Officers, is having a conference in June where she's going to actually be able to complete that interview because there were 2 questions she didn't get to ask. So if you want to go see that and you feel like FOMO, I think it's $600. It's in Atlanta. I'm going to go because I want to know. They have an ally track. It's not just for Black folks. So check it out.
There's also the Woke conference coming. So that's, I think, which is a separate meeting, but and will not have her there, I don't believe. But nevertheless, the conversation continues, which I guess is one of the points here. Jen, I saw you nodding. Do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I was unaware of the timing because I just kind of went into the room and there were announcements and awards and announcements, and I actually sat down for a little bit in the back and got some work done. And I was like, "Ooh, I get to get some work done before the keynote comes up." But I actually spent I was in North Carolina for about 18 years. I worked at the public media station, which is part of the UNC Chapel Hill, sort of community. And so I was aware of, what had happened with Nicole Hannah-Jones. And, and of course, as she had said, it was kind of national news that she was not given this tenure, because for people that don't know, she was not given tenure for a position at UNC Chapel Hill because of one 25 million pledged donor who had not actually made that $25 million gift, had only made $1 million of that. And this donor influenced the decision of, it was either the Board of Governors or Board of Trustees. I'm kind of thinking it's the governors, because she had widespread support across the board from, not only the faculty, but also the students for her appointment as a professor. And so it was really quite shocking that she didn't get it. So I was so happy to hear her explain the story of what she did afterward, because I was not aware of that. When she herself mobilized grantors and funders to raise $25 million, actual dollars, that went to Howard University. And now I'm here in DC, which is just like amazing. And, now she's at Howard, and just really like that pivot of the impact that she had. I mean, it was, like MT right now, I mean, I was just kind of cheering in the background. So I loved that part of the story, but also I loved that she was so honest about philanthropy, and just like, we're taking money from billionaires who are really making their money on the backs of poor people, and like the 1%, 2% of the people, and we're chasing these dollars. So and she even said for herself, like, how can I operate in the most ethical way in kind of this unethical environment? And it was just such a great conversation, and I was hanging on every word. I don't think I moved out of my seat except maybe to cheer the whole time. So it was excellent, and I really was so I just felt so fortunate that I was able to be there. So those were my takeaways.
Well, Lori and I are eating our hearts out, because she was delayed getting in, and I didn't know it was happening at the time it ended up happening. So I was somewhere else, unfortunately. But it does speak to something which is kind of embedded in, I guess, what we're all talking about in a way, which is there's a practical element to going to the conferences as well as the social one, whether you're a member or not. I guess part of what the benefit is we connect with other people, either to advance ideas or share ideas, or maybe just to, feel human, help one another out in some way. But then there's all the sessions that dig into particular issues, like we were talking about earlier with AI. And I wonder if, in addition to the big themes, and I want to get back to that as we, finish today, because there was a big theme that was addressed, but I have heard from others, and I think I may be in agreement that it was addressed only partially at the end of the conference. It's extremely significant in Canada, arguably the most significant social justice issue in Canada, and also very big in the United States in a way we have never fully addressed. But let's wait on that so people stick with us. And there are all these other sessions that are meat and potatoes for what we do, and they have to do with our relationships with donors and things like that. So, Lori, can you take us to a place like that? I know you didn't have a chance to go to a lot of content, but you were delivering some of the content. So when you think about this, both from the chapter perspective and AFP writ large, and this conference even specifically, where does all that shake out? What are the things that you benefit most from? What are the things that you try to direct people to gain the most benefit from one of these conferences?
Right. Well, that's a great question, Jay, because it's really challenging both to deliver content and to sit through sessions and really absorb content. And here's the tricky challenge, especially speaking as a marketer. It becomes really difficult to communicate in advance exactly what you're going to be talking about and at what level you're going to be speaking. And so I think the frustration that I heard from people was, oh, gee, this session, just in general, I'm not speaking about a particular session, but this session was too basic. It was too simple. It was too, and I think that is a challenge inherent in virtually any conference, is really trying to figure out how to communicate in advance what the topic is going to be and how useful it's going to be. And there are just so many different moving parts so that people are sitting in sessions that they can really, really get something out of. And as a speaker, you understand if folks are not really, didn't, maybe the title wasn't quite right, or maybe the session changed in some way between the time it was proposed and the time it was delivered. That's a long gap, right? They're accepting proposals now for the next icon, right? So it's a year in advance, really, that you're proposing a session. So I think that's a big challenge for people, and they folks just kind of do their best. And I did deliver some content. I did a session, and it was the very last session before the final closing, large speaker, keynote speaker, not keynote, but the ending speaker. And that's a challenging time because people are exhausted. As many of you have already said, these things are tiring and people are exhausted, and a lot of folks, have absorbed as much as they can. But it was a very, it was a fun session. We were talking about, in my case, we were talking about branding for capital campaigns. So it was, again, at that intersection of branding, of marketing and fundraising. So, why should you brand a capital campaign? Because it's an effort and it takes resources to do it. So why bother? So why you should do it. And then we dove quite a bit into how to do it. So in other words, what milestones you need to hit if you're going to brand your campaign, and then a lot of back and forth in between. But that was just one of, I don't know, 80 some sessions that were going on. I also heard a really good one that was about organizing your board. So it was on the governance side, so completely different topic, but it was by Chris Coons from CCS, and she was talking about, really organizing your board and engaging your board and using certain structures to make sure that happens. So that was some pretty nitty-gritty stuff.
And just a point, which is that these sessions, I can't remember how much of the content is recorded. Can anybody remind me? So in other words, some of this may be accessible if you want to go and hear it.
Absolutely. So yes, the slides are available. The PowerPoint slides are available for download. And they were going to be changing them because they, as a speaker, I will tell you, they had us upload them before, around Thanksgiving, right? It was a long time ago. It was a really long time ago. And so, I mean, it was good, because it made you I don't know if Thanksgiving is right. It might have been January. Actually, it was January. But anyway, we uploaded the slides, but I overheard that they were going to redo that if somebody had a different set of slides that they actually used in their presentation. And then every session was recorded on audio, not video. and it wasn't, so someone could theoretically follow along on the slides and listen to the audio, and they encouraged us to make sure that if people were asking questions that they got to a mic, or the speaker repeated the question so that it was in the mic. So hopefully those recordings, I don't know the logistics of when they're coming out, but hopefully those can help.
And is that true also for the keynotes and the plenaries? Do you know?
I'm afraid I don't know, Jay.
Okay, and I don't know if the MT might know about the panel. Was that part of the co-conspirators? Was that recorded as well?
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, because that's something else that people, if they're looking to look back at their conference content and they're thinking, I need to learn about writing a case statement or major gifts, they may not automatically look there. But if it's available, perhaps there's a way to.
We do have a website. It's called takeactionafp.org.
Okay.
So if people want to see more about what we've been doing, they can go there, and maybe the slides will be posted there. We also have a video that we played, which you can view there.
Okay.
About what we learned about our experience as co-conspirators. So
yeah. Thank you for that. And that's again, can we put that in the chat, the URL again? I'm sorry.
Of course.
Okay. And Jen, actually was a question for you. And Nick, you may have thoughts on the subject as well, or perhaps all of you do. And that's from Heather, who had asked, what surprised you at the donor-centric panel? And what did you learn?
Oh, yes. Well, like I said before, I am not in major gift fundraising and not, working with foundations. So I love hearing the experiences of others who are coming from that world. And at the same time, I am aware of somewhat aware of the donor-centric and community-centric fundraising approaches and how there has been some tension about that. So what I liked about what Angela and Jack had to say was that they were not necessarily promoting or saying one is better than the other. They were simply pointing out the issues that come with donor-centric fundraising and how that can be very detrimental from a donor dominance kind of standpoint. For example, you have a major donor of $25,000. They gave the example, this donor works in the room and walks in the room and all eyes are on that donor and all others are kind of left behind. And that donor's voice is the loudest in the room and they get the most attention. So then this kind of plays into them having influence in the organization, having influence on programs, coming in and saying, I want to give you $250,000 and I want you to start this new program that really has nothing to do with their mission and how to kind of handle that. So, and, there were a lot of people that were kind of what should we do about that? So they were offering, they simply were saying these conversations need to be happening within the organization. They pointed to creating a donor code of ethics for the organization, getting your donors to sign that and agree to it and understand, their role, the organization's role, and that the staff members are going to carry out the mission and there's staff expertise and, that they really need to be doing the work. They also had, recommended a couple of other resources on the AFP Global site for thinking about this. And there was one other point that I wanted to make about that too. There was something else. So, in fundraising, we're always saying, and I worked at prior to coming into public media, I was with a food bank in North Carolina for 10 years. And, we always say your $1 will provide 5 meals or 10 meals or your donation, there's kind of this tagline that motivates the donor to give and has been proven to sort of, improve revenue results. But actually what you're doing is putting power in the donor's hand and making them, putting them in sort of the savior position when really the heroes in the organizations are the clients. And those are the ones who are, you know, they're the ones who, you know, have to, you know, have to make a dollar, you know, they're struggling within their communities. Like, they should be the ones celebrated instead of focusing so much on the donors.
This
So
is
it's just
really,
a really
interesting.
great conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's one that, again, like the other things we were talking about earlier, are so important because they affect all of our organizations in one way or another, whether we seem to recognize it or not. And it seems like the conversation typically goes along this line, which is either donors are great, you know, or donors are terrible. And both of those seem to then you know, relieve us of any responsibility about establishing our own policies and guidelines and following them. It's not about whether or not these people are the best in the world or the worst in the world. They're people who happen to have resources. And the question is, how do we interact with those people with resources to achieve some objective without, you know, of course, altering it. So it's great to hear that these conversations are both taking on a thematic role, but also a practical one in these sessions. I wanted to point out something, which is that because a couple of you have mentioned this, we have coming up soon, in addition to these conferences that we're mentioning, which are really great, we also have within the world of AFP, the session submission deadline is coming up. So if there are topics that we think should be addressed, anybody in this room can submit a topic for next year's conference. You can also submit for your regional conferences, your chapter conferences, which are pretty important. There's additionally, the board nominations are up, and you can nominate yourself, or you can nominate somebody you think really AFP and all of us would benefit from having. So I want to encourage folks to participate in that process, because you have complete agency. You can be one person who decides to nominate some people you think have a voice that needs to be heard. And if you have a voice that needs to be heard, you can nominate yourself. And then finally, there is another thing that I think they mentioned on the stage toward the end about the development of the strategic plan for AFP. This goes back to something MT was talking about earlier, which is whether or not some of these issues are being addressed kind of in depth, I might say, versus performatively. And I'm not taking a position on that, but rather just suggesting that that's an important thing to discuss. And in effect, that strategic planning will be addressing a whole host of issues, and that comes out initially including an ethics statement at the beginning of next year. And I believe that AI is not addressed in that statement. That's what I've heard from people. And if I'm wrong, I would certainly like to be corrected. But I think it's important as we talk about all these issues, ranging from, you know, social justice to the way we conduct business. AI is going to influence all those things. Anyway, I'm sorry to have gone on a rant there, but Nick, you've been listening to me babble. So what are your thoughts on some of these issues? And you deal with them also at a regional level, just as Lori does. You do with VFRI. So how are you addressing them there?
So, I mean, I think that it's true. It's one of the hardest things in planning a conference, in my opinion, is making sure that you've got a wide variety of topics and at a wide variety of levels, so that you can make sure that you're providing content to someone who's never planned to use, as an example, a giving day, as well as someone who's done a giving day for years, and really wants to take it to that next level. So kind of those 101 and 201 type sessions. And I wish I had the answer. One of the things we do for VFRI is we ask speakers, who's the intended audience? And is it, you know, entry level, mid-level, or experienced? We do have, and I just happened to notice this for this year's sessions, we also have it's intended for all audiences. And if anybody wants to take a guess at which one is most selected, it's for all audiences. And so part of me wonders if it's adjusting the RFP process and inviting people to express interest and say, this is the topic, and then having conversations with people to say, we need a session that is an entry-level session, and we need a session that's more that I'm not really sure of the best way to do it. But if anybody has thoughts, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, in fact, Mazarine, do you mind if I turn this to you? Because you said something earlier, and you talk about it however you wish, if you wish, about not, kind of whispering, I'm not an AFP member, but you're active field in a big way. So are there things that would make the content that's provided either by AFP ICON or by any of these regional conferences, like the AADO conference, for that matter, that would make it more enticing, but also could be improved? I mean, I'm sure any of our conferences could be better. So what are some of the things which strike you? And because you keep coming back, but you're not a member, so what would make you more active?
Well, I really like speaking, Jay, as you know. That's my favorite.
Right.
And so the reason I've gone all these times is to speak, but I also like to learn. And I definitely am not arrogant enough to think I have nothing to learn, because I do. It is exhausting to try to go to all the sessions and to know that you missed them. So I agree with everybody here who said that. And I also want to qualify my earlier statement about how they're really interested in optics. I think some folks there are, but not everyone. And things are changing. Based on the fact that they had a CCF panel and Black Men in Fundraising thing, there were a lot of good signs this year too. And in terms of programming that I would like to see that would make me become a member and become more interested in attending everything, I'd say let's address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about white supremacy, post-capitalist futures, and resisting work. For me, that is most interesting because of the climate crisis we find ourselves in, because of the endless wars, because of so many things that cannot really be denied at this point, and business as usual isn't going to get us very far with that. And I'd just like some acknowledgement that COVID isn't over either, and having like a hybrid option that's robust for folks would be a moneymaker for AFP, as well as really helpful for folks with ability challenges. The conference center, I'm sure, did their best, but there was a lot of walking, and not like they had sign language interpretation for everything, or captions. So even though those aren't my disabilities, I try to be mindful of accessibility for folks when I can as a speaker. And I think in my conferences that I've done 15 online conferences now, technology is advanced that we have closed captioning. We can have bilingual presentations and sessions as well. I feel like more acknowledgement about who is in the dominant culture, who is making these decisions, and how we can get more folks in the decision-making process that are not from the dominant culture or from the dominant sexuality or from the dominant language or from the dominant, not ... right? That's what I've seen that I really liked at other conferences. Is that helpful?
Yeah, of course. It also strikes me that I'm sure the objection would be one of these kind of it's impractical because of, and there's a budgetary thing and this and that. And there may be much truth in that, but it's also probably a lack of knowledge about how to implement. So in fairness to everybody involved in this, because many of them are volunteers, as we all know, because we've all volunteered at these things, that we come to it with enthusiasm and the knowledge that we have, but not necessarily knowledge of the things that we don't know. And so, but as you just pointed out, we've been living through a pandemic for several years. So what are the learnings that we can take and apply? And perhaps some of that's happening at the local level and then bubbling up. I'm not sure. And Lori, you might be able to speak to that, because again, you were the AFP, president for a pretty big chapter here in the DC area, which co-produces, I'm not sure what the right term is, the Bridge Conference, which is quite large. So rather than National Philanthropy Day, that's the big gorilla conference of this region. So what is it? What are the things that you can take from all of these learnings, these experiences, and these thoughts? Do you think that the current chapter, which Jen, you're a part of, can apply in terms of programming conferences, which are truly as inclusive as they could be?
Right, really great question. And the conference that Jay's referring to is called the Bridge to Integrated Marketing and Fundraising, commonly called the Bridge Conference for short, because that's such a long name. And some of the issues that MT that you're raising are, the same issues that that conference has been grappling with for a number of years, the years I've been involved anyway. And some of it, excuse me, is and this tags back to what you were saying, Jay. Some of the things we want to do in terms of making the conference as inclusive as possible actually really can't be done with the cost structure of the current conference, because that tension of we're trying to keep the cost of entry as low as possible so that as many people as possible can come to the conference, and that sort of pulls against how you're spending the money that you are bringing in, right? And so for example, at Bridge, I don't think we, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we even record each session. Yeah, I didn't think so. And we had long discussions about trying to make it hybrid, trying to have, an online component. And actually, I'm going to toss it to you, Jen, because with your talent, you've been able to, some folks have turned to, and I don't know if you've been involved with this, doing live streaming. Jen has been a tremendous leader in getting the chapter to live stream some events, which has been fabulous. And there's been a little live streaming happening at Bridge, but in terms of straight up, having a hybrid model, it's just enormously, it's expensive. And so that was the biggest hurdle that we've been running into. And I want to say something else, Jay, I'm sorry, because this is a little off topic, but I wanted to mention that the next ICON in 2025 is in Seattle, April 27th through 29th. And someone in the comments was asking about the timing of this past ICON conference because it fell during Ramadan, it was a hurdle for a number of Muslim colleagues. So it looks like that's not going to be the case next year. Point closed. Jen, do you want to talk about live streaming a little bit?
And Jen, as you do, and Nick, of course, I want to welcome you into this part of this conversation from your perspective. But I'd like to also welcome up here Ben Moeller, who has a long history with AFP, and I'm sure we'll have something to contribute about this conference and maybe some reactions to some of the things you all are saying. So, but please go ahead, Jen and Nick.
Yeah, I'll just say that, there is the cost to be considered, obviously, when you're doing, a hybrid model, but also the technology layers on top of that are so tricky. Even at we did 2 events where we had live streaming, and ensuring that that you don't have background noise, that you have the technical support on the live streaming, and there's a lot of it's almost like hosting a second conference. So it's very tricky. I was really surprised actually that this and maybe it has to do with the conference center that can play a big role in the technology capabilities that you have for a conference. We have, even in conferences that I've been involved in planning, the discussion always comes up because it would be great. Of course, you want everyone to be able to come and, if they can't join virtually or live stream, but it gets very, very tricky with the cameras and the mics and the cords and the setup and the background noise. And so we've done it twice, not without its level of stress. But I think that people who did tune in and were featured, and people who could see it happening in live really enjoyed it. But it does get very tricky.
And I just want to make one comment on that, and then Nick, I'd like to welcome your comments, and then finally welcome Ben to make some observations as well. And that's that again, if AFP is opening the doors to a number of things: sessions, board members, committees, and perhaps some inputs into these things are going to be released in January. And I did get confirmation from a person in the chat that that's from Patty, that AI is not addressed in the new code of ethics. If that's assuming that Patty and I are correct, then that's another thing. But there are people in our sector, perhaps like you, MT, who sometimes are not actively engaged in the work of AFP, but have opinions that perhaps we would benefit from. One person who's been in this series is Tiffany Yu of Diversibility, and terrific advocate for people of various disabilities. I'm using her language, not my own. And I think it's an opportunity perhaps for people in our sector to seek their counsel so that we can do not what we think is right and not to avoid the issue, but to listen to people who can tell us what to do that benefits these constituencies, which have been usually unwittingly ignored. So in any case, that's just one thing that we could do.
I agree with that, Jay. All I have to say is online conferences, super cheap, easily accessible. You can make them free. Some people can pay. Sponsors can take care of the costs if there are any, and pay speakers all at the same time.
Right.
What could be easier? My thoughts.
Yes. Nick, any thoughts on that before Ben chimes in?
Yeah, no, so I mean, I agree. I think, it's imperative for planning committees to take into consideration how to make conferences more accessible. And, it is more work and sometimes can be more cost. But I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on making it complicated. It's not my local AFP chapter, but another professional development group in Richmond, Virginia called VAFRI. Ever since the pandemic, I don't want to say ended because MTI I agree with you. It's just different is where we are. But we still, all of our monthly meetings, you have an opportunity to come in person or you can go virtually. And so I will say I have not attended virtual since it's been an option to be in person. And I haven't watched them, but we record those. And so it is possible to do it where you could have sort of, maybe it's just individual Zoom rooms for all of the breakout rooms. And so people can attend, because I think cost, I'll be honest, I will self-disclose. I came to Toronto this year because I happened to log into LinkedIn on September 30th and register on the last day of the early, whatever the cheapest way you could go to AFP ICON. Every other year I miss it. And then I'm like, oh crud, I'm in the full, and I just can't justify that cost. And I think it's also imperative for all of these large conferences to look at it. I've realized AFP ICON, BBCon, and APRA, which are all big conferences, their next conferences are all in Seattle. So if you are not on the West Coast, it is going to be extremely cost prohibitive to attend. And you're going, I mean, I personally have never been to Seattle and it's on my list of places to go, but I'm like, I don't think I can justify getting to those three conferences all in the same city in the span of less than a year. So, maybe the large international bodies can sort of get together, for the most part, the timing works out, but say like, okay, we're not going to all end up on the West Coast at the same time, because there may be people. I actually ran into more APRA folks at AFP ICON than non-APRA folks that I know. So, there is some cross-pollination between the professional association conferences, and I think that's something to take into consideration.
Right. And if there's someone in the audience who has a room for Nick and his family for the several months those conferences are occurring, just send him a text right away.
You don't want my 3 kids. I love them to death, but they...
Well, and speaking of kids, I know that Ben was off screen for a minute because he had to rescue a child who had taken a tumble. So thank you for coming back. Ben, for people who don't know you, do you mind giving a quick introduction to yourself and especially your AFP connection?
Yeah, sure. I am Ben Moeller. I am the chief executive of Giving3. I'm It serves nonprofit leaders and the boards. And I'm on the board of AFP Global, and I'm on the board of United Way of Kentucky, and I've been to 14 icons. I've spoken at 7. And so I haven't missed an icon since Baltimore of 2010. And so I guess I have a long view of having seen all the conferences and what I like and what I don't like. So I put a comment in the chat for the host and panelists about unpopular opinion, the keynote is dead. I think the keynote had a purpose for a long time because it was the draw to brought people in. And I think that it was appropriate for this icon. But I was actually talking with a friend of mine, Eric Heiniger, with Eden Consulting and Eden Plus Consulting, and he and I were discussing that it'd be really valuable if the conference would, instead of sitting through a session where people are talking at you and it is somewhat peripheral to what you're doing, and maybe it's inspirational, but maybe they don't quite understand the audience, then it might be more valuable to have a session where people come away with a deliverable. So it may be broken up by their expertise or their area of focus. So, like a pre-con, but it would be the keynote and it'd be a group of, 50 individuals. And you would, at the end of it, have a case for support, or you'd have a marketing strategy, or you had some sort of deliverable that would provide you value that would not be a keynote, but it would be a different way of engaging, which I was really intrigued with that conversation and that insight and perception that Eric was having. Because I think back of the speakers that I really enjoyed, and it was actually near the beginning, when they actually spent significant budget on it. It is challenging to do that now with the budget constraints, like you're saying, the price of entry. So that is one thing that I've noticed, is that the quality of speakers is excellent, but the application to the sector, application for us to go back and have actionable strategies is limited. And I think nowadays folks want to be able to take an idea, take an inspiration, and actually put it to practice. So that's one thing that just kind of resonated with me. As it relates to technology, I've seen this firsthand, having done the early conferences to now, and in the past it was kind of the Wild West when it came to templates and presentation and the styles, and it's gotten far better in terms of the quality. I do think it is challenging with technology to have it so that you can record and stream it, especially some of the engagement strategies that you might use. In my session, for instance, we wanted to do a poll of the audience, but it was really, really quite complicated to do because it's locked down into that system, and we couldn't go back and forth between the PowerPoint slides that they present and then also the system that we would use. And so things like that are challenging, and it's hard to have an engaging session for virtual attendees in the way that you do in person. So I really think an in-person versus a virtual are two separate things. And I actually am a proponent of not having it recorded. I feel like having it live is a special treat and something that people go and that they're in the room at the moment, and you almost have to be there to really gain from it. So I'm kind of an anti let's record it and let's resell it, which may be also unpopular opinion. Because I find that the best part of the conference is those connections, which I don't get in online. I don't have those in a virtual online experience. And Jay, you probably saw this firsthand. You had a front row seat. The DonorSearch booth was right by the front door, and you saw probably me running in and out like the whole conference, right?
A little bit, yeah.
About 2 to 3 months before the conference, I'm reaching out to all the folks I really want to see, and I make sure that I have scheduled a dance card that I'm actually spending time intentionally with individuals. And so I might schedule some of those over sessions. I might schedule them to be adjacent to sessions that they're attending. I'll do evening and morning plans, and I basically pack my calendar so I'm spending one-on-one FaceTime with people, and not just going to the sessions and that's all I get. So for me, the in-person is really critical. And the thing that I've seen as it relates to, there's conversation about having it in Seattle. It's expensive. Not everyone's going to be able to attend. I think that's absolutely the point of having the conference in different locations, is that it's not expected that everyone will attend every conference. I think I'm an outlier going to 14 in a row. I think it's really intentionally focused on having different regions so that it attracts different people. So some people want to go when it's close to home and it's affordable. Others want to go when it is away from home and they get to see folks that are not in their circle. And I think that
Benjamin, I agree with you. It's great to have it spread around, but I think what Nick was saying was that it's still about affordability for folks, even at the lowest cost level.
Yeah.
And that's why having an option to attend online that's a smaller cost can be useful for folks, as well as folks that are housebound who are taking care of elders or children. That's just something else to consider. It's a great privilege to be able to say, we've gone multiple times, and I get that, right? But most folks are struggling, you know?
Well, it may be a privilege. It's also a sacrifice. Because I talked this through with some of the folks there at the conference that, the number of kids I've had born, and I sacrificed spending time with my family in those early moments of my kids' lives. So, some folks do make the sacrifice to go, and it is a privilege, but sometimes you make the investment because it's important to your career, your growth, or the role you play for your organization.
May I ask you all about and just one last point on this, which is there room, as we've gone through what we've gone through the past 3 years, especially, but also technology advancing along with that, is there a possibility of having content that is available for audiences which it cannot travel for whatever reason, or as well as live conferences that don't become a two-tiered system, but in fact part of a whole? And this isn't necessarily the best example, but it is an example, which is the world that Nick talked about, and that's APRA, which in the last few years have had the big APRA, as many of us call it. But then they will have also not only their chapter conferences, as AFP does and others do, but then in addition, they will have some virtual meetings throughout the year, which are targeted to various issues, but are of a sufficient breadth of interest that they can welcome a lot of people who don't have the budget, are physically unable, or because of family responsibilities, unable to attend. Is that something that AFP is trying to do more of, rather than just the big conference and the individual webinars? Do you know?
I know that they're trying to do more work with the affinity groups and make it so that those affinity groups are, you have the local chapter experience. But if you think about, like me, I'm in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky, and I'm not necessarily always able to drive even locally to my local chapter because it's kind of a hike.
It's far. Yeah.
And you think of like further out, kind of in the hollers. That's what we call in Kentucky. We call it's the rural areas called the hollers. It's even further. And so having the affinity groups is a way that you create community between conferences. And I think that you can have that experience. I think the experience is not going to be the general conference or the general group. It's going to be more of a, pick your affinity group, pick your community that is going to be kind of curated around that, less around local and less around general. And so you may be able to step in and out of different communities based on what you need, where you're at, that sort of thing. So I think that's the direction, but it's hard to say longer term because at the end of the day, it comes down to the economies of it. Is it sustainable? Will members pay for things, make it worthwhile?
I know we've covered a lot and we've only scratched the surface. I'm really appreciating the fact that all of you took time to do this, and that people also were hanging out with us live during most of it to listen. I think that speaks to an interest, sometimes unsatisfied with both the issues, but also the formats. And it's not to say that there's something seriously wrong here, because people want to go. That's why 3,500 people flew to Toronto. But it also means that there's another, how many people is that? I can't do the percentages in my head, but it's at least 85% of the membership were unable to or did not choose to attend this particular time. Hopefully they can go to Seattle, and we have a way, especially through friends like all of you here, as well as the avenues that we have through the chapter structure and AFP's various deadlines, to participate in talking about what can be there. I just want to add one thing because I don't think anybody mentioned it. And since people who weren't there wouldn't have seen this, 40% of the speakers were speakers of color, 30% were international, 25% were Canadian. That's something that AFP talks about, but it easily gets lost. Mazrin, you pointed out in the chat to us that that the keynotes are not recorded. My assumption is that's probably because their editors don't want them recorded, but I don't really know that. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because it's possible sometimes that if you can't go, you also miss things like this. But it doesn't mean we miss participating in the discussion at the regional level. So I hope one thing that will happen is that some of the things we've been talking about will then not trickle down. Oh my gosh, I was never going to use that phrase. They will find some way of bubbling up into all the content at all of our conferences and meetings around the country and virtual gatherings like this one. I also have done interviews myself there because that's why I was in the booth the whole time, Ben, with a whole bunch of these award winners, and they deserve more than 2 minutes on that stage. That's not AFP's problem. This is my one criticism of all of us, including myself. That's our problem for not giving enough attention to the people rising in this profession. So I would encourage people to give a listen if you can tolerate hearing my voice, asking these people about their lives, because they have truly done remarkable things. And so we're going to be releasing those over the next few weeks. Another sidebar is that there's an opportunity, I think, to engage with all the creators, some of whom have been here today, to talk about these issues. And I would encourage all of us to do that, and to see if there's a way to participate in more discussions like this one, so your voice can be heard. But since we're at 4:46, I'm going to wrap up and just say thank you, both those who are here and had to leave, like Ria, but also Lori and Nick and Jen and Ben and MT for hanging out today. Really do appreciate you, and for all you do with AFP, but more importantly, the social sector as a whole. Thank you. And thank you to all of you guys out there who've been hanging with us the whole time or watching this recording afterwards. Please be involved in what happens with our association. It can only be as good as what we put into it. And hang out with us next week. We've got more sessions coming at you. So until then, take care of yourselves.